It's the Rangers Journal Night.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rangers Journal. My name is Billy Rankin, and we'll be discussing with a couple of guests the fantastic topic of Ally McCoist's managerial career at Rangers. It's an eventful time in the club's history, so I'm sure we're going to have a lot to say on it. So joined tonight by, as I say, two guests. Doug, how are you this evening, mate?
I'm good, thank you.
Good stuff. And Thommo, yourself?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Billy. Looking forward to this. I think it could be a lively discussion, so get involved in the comments.
Let's touch on a little bit of memories of Ally McCoist just quickly as a player. For me, he's the reason I started supporting Rangers. I was just the right age for, and he was the right striker, the right team. Doug, are you in that similar age bracket? Was he your kind of first superhero?
Absolutely. By far and away a distance, for me, Ally is the greatest Ranger ever. Total footballing hero, and yeah, he was there when I started getting into football and getting into Rangers, and was there as I grew up loving them. So yeah, I couldn't have any more love for Ally McCoist if I tried.
And Tom, my very first trip, Rangers trip that is, because my mum got me a Scotland one, I think, before the Rangers one. But the first one was the one with the wee squares on it, and I had number 9 on the back. This was before the days of having players having their names printed along with it, but number 9 was my first printed T-shirt. Have you got similar memories to that?
Yeah, most definitely. I remember the first game I went to was Rangers were away to Dunfermline in 1989, and Ally scored 2 goals that day. And then growing up, getting more into football, the guy was an absolute class act. And I don't know, I think as the years go on, it gets a little bit forgotten how good he actually was. You know, people just seem to think of him as this 6 yards penalty box poacher, and he was much more than that. And as I say, he was an absolutely fantastic striker. Won the European Golden Boot 2 times in a row. I think only maybe Messi has done that since him. Yeah, absolutely brilliant player, and as both of you have rightly said, one of the reasons for getting involved and loving football.
Well, unfortunately, we're not here to talk about Ally McCoist as a player. We're here to discuss his managerial career. Well, he didn't come straight to us in his first job as assistant manager. He actually came with Walter from Scotland. I was quite happy when he was appointed with Walter Smith as a Scotland manager, and he was assistant. I thought he did well. I thought that was a time of change for Scotland to have a bit of belief in ourselves again. Do you remember his time there, Doug, as assistant manager? Sorry, Doug, I was addressing you. I don't know if you...
Yeah. No, I was perfectly happy with it at the time. Obviously, Walter and Ally had a good run with Scotland. We're getting them doing well, and so we were obviously at a bit of a struggle at the time. So getting Walter back was a happy time, and yeah, I mean, I even remember thinking at the time that having a personality like Ally as a coach would make for such a good dressing room atmosphere. And from what I gather, that was kind of what panned out in terms of that first little period. That he was that kind of middleman. Walter was Walter, but Ally was the one that players could maybe approach a bit more and could be a bit more friendly with them rather than just being like, as I say, a coach manager type. So a good way for him to sort of get his foot in the door.
And Thommo, I was along the same lines as Doug there. I felt similar with Scotland. Now, when he came with Walter to Rangers as assistant manager, was pleased with that too. He's just like Doug was saying, that's the impression we got, that he was the kind of in-between man, the man that could go and, talk to the players and be that, like is it a velvet glove under the fist or whatever that saying is. But when the time comes for him to be appointed manager, was that a shock to you? or was it something we fully expected?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was a shock. I think it had been the plan near enough since Walter came back. Got to remember, Ally took charge of some cup matches when Walter was the manager, done the tactics, done the team. So when it actually came to him being appointed manager, I wasn't overly shocked. Whether it was the right man or not is a different question, but I think that whole process was underway for a couple of years.
So when he took over, we weren't quite aware of how bad things were going to get for us. Doug, when he first took over his first season, I believe at one point it might even have been as much as 15 points ahead of Celtic. So
he was indeed.
Yeah, he must have been doing something right initially then. And then, of course, we have the financial troubles, as we'll call it. And we end up getting deducted 10 points, I believe, for going into administration. And then, as I say, we go down the leagues. But just on his first season, it might be a good time if you want to discuss who he brought in his first time as manager there. If you've got that slide, Doug, if you want to bring that up.
Yeah, well, I mean, the slide covers all of his signings,
Yep.
but everything started so well in terms of how things were going. I remember at the time having real kind of, like Walter had succeeded Souness, having been his assistant, and I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, it's just like that. This could be." I was so excited for a potential future with my favourite ever player, leading us into a great few years, and that's where it started. Like you said, we absolutely roared ahead in the league, and after I think we went on a 9 wins in 10 games. His first Old Firm beat Celtic 4-2, with a couple of great goals in that game as well. And you can see in terms of like some of the signings, players like Lee Wallace, Templeton, Bocanegra, they were all decent signings. As you get further into the list, it's not quite as the memories aren't quite as good, perhaps. But there's a couple of decent players in there. Obviously, throughout his tenure, he started to rely, I think, on the kind of Walter template of trying to bring in players he knew, older players who were kind of had been there and done that. So he brings back Chris Boyd to the club. He brings back Kenny Miller. And there's a couple of other sort of players with experience in there that he brought in that were kind of hits and misses. But I mean, there's an obvious kind of template, I think, to a lot of those players. But then obviously at the same time, as we'll touch on, going through the years, he wasn't exactly given all the tools to get the best of success, and in particular there was periods of times where we were getting linked with really good and exciting sounding players, but then none of them came through. I remember one of the most exciting in terms of him being a decent young player was it David Goodwillie? I forget his first name, but who wasn't an exciting player. He was one that we were linked to but didn't get over the line. There's a couple of other guys as well, yeah, like you say, it all started so well until the inevitable occurred.
Yeah, Goodwillie I met in a nightclub around about that time and asked him about it, and he wouldn't give an answer. No surprise that he was in a nightclub, but I mean, so the first season, Thommo, none of us at the beginning of it were prepared for what was going to happen, and obviously we're going to talk about his time down the leagues, but I want to discuss his leadership at that time when we were getting hit from every angle with relegation and fines, and there was certain elements of the hierarchy in Scottish football that wanted to finish the club off. The thing that sticks out for me was him refusing any agreement to give up any titles. His overall kind of leadership at that point, though, I was impressed by it, and we needed somebody fighting our corner. What do you recollect at that time?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on, Billy. I mean, the discussion on this is, was he a good manager or not, and whether at the end of it, some people will say yes, some people will say no. I think everyone will be in agreement that at that time in our history, we had the right man in charge. We didn't have someone who was just a yes man and was just going to, bend over and do whatever had to be done to, please people. He stood up for us. He fought the corner when nobody else was, even people within the club. There were very few who were wanting to fight the corner. I think at that time was it Charles Green who was the main shareholder. And again, another snake oil salesman, just looking for money. Ally McCoist at that point was an absolute hero, and as I say, whether the decision is yes, he was a good manager, not a good manager, he was the right man at that time in our history. I genuinely dread to think what would have happened had it been someone else in charge. Who knows? Would we even have a team to support now? That's how big his impact was, in my opinion.
Doug, can you come in on this as well, just to give us your recollection of McCoist at that time?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I was excited by the prospect of having him coming in and what we could potentially do. I was hoping that he would continue the kind of trajectory that we were on. And, like Thommo said, I do genuinely wonder what could have happened to the club during the years that followed, whether or not someone who had such love for the club and who put the club before themselves. Like you said, he was a huge voice against the sort of 5-way deal that would see us getting removed titles and things like that. And I think if he hadn't been there and hadn't been so, and he was very, very aggressively against, he's meant to have walked out of an SFA meeting when it first came up, and basically just stood up and said, "I'm not even discussing this," and left before going, forward and out to publicly say it. And had we not had someone who was that try and get words out, I can say, who was that adamant about it, then that's a deal that I can imagine someone that like Green might have taken, because that deal might have seen us start in the Championship rather than Division 3, and given that would have been more financially lucrative, I'm sure those in charge would have been quite happy with that. Despite the fact I think it would have lost us something like 5 league titles and 8 cups across the 2 trophies. So having someone to fight that corner was so important. And one thing I really want to do when we're having this discussion is separate the McCoist, the manager, in terms of him being a manager as a figurehead and a leadership role, and then him as a manager in terms of tactics and football, because I do think there's a gap between the two there. He was a limited manager. I don't think anyone can say otherwise. And as we'll go on to discuss, I'm sure results could vary significantly. But I can't think of anyone else I would rather have had as manager overall for all the stuff that was happening off the pitch.
I agree with you both, and I just wanted to separate, as you say, Doug, separate that point that we could have had a Craig White pansy appointed in that role that would have just done anything that his masters have told him. So moving on from that, though, Tom, let's talk about his style of play, because Doug touched on it there. I'm not a tactics guru. I like a big man and a wee man up front. And the Ally McCoist is my template, but the different style he had from Walter Smith. I think you could see that in the cup games, because we never seemed as comfortable when he was taking the cup games as assistant manager. And I've been to a few of them, and I didn't know at the time that's what was happening, that McCoist was actually taking the training that week and doing the team talks and everything. But it was a marked difference when we're in the cup, at least to the later rounds, when I think probably Walter got a bit more involved. But what would you remember about his style of play as setting his teams up?
Yeah, I think we've got to separate it from when he was in that first season after he took over from Walter, and then obviously when we were in the lower leagues. But when he first took over, I recall us playing some really good football. As Doug has said, we beat Celtic 4-2 at Ibrox. Played really well that day. And the football, to my mind, was decent. It was good. But a large part of that was down to Stephen Naismith. He was in unbelievable form. And then I think it was around the October, November time, he'd done his cruciate. And from then, we just seemed, even before the financial stuff hit in the February, we seemed to then struggle. I'm not saying we were a one-man team, but he was a massive miss. And then our style of play just seemed to be a lot more slower, a lot more turgid. Just we didn't have that zip. So I think McCoist, I would say overall, was we win. We need to win, but it doesn't matter how we play. It's just getting those 3 points or getting through the cup game. It wasn't so much about a style of play that's going to entertain the fans. And God knows we saw a lot of that in the lower leagues. A lot of it I've managed to bury somewhere back there in the old dome. But yeah, apart from that first sort of 10, 12 games of that season, it was a very slow build-up of play and just we'll get this across the line and that'll do us. As long as we get the 3 points, that's all that matters.
Doug, he still had the remnants in that first season of a championship winning team, so is it maybe no surprise that he seemed to, his managerial career started quite well because he had certainly a lot better players than he went on to have?
Absolutely. I mean, like you say, I think it's fair to say that he was a limited manager, but he also had limited resources at his disposal apart from that first year. And I also think as well, whenever you move from one manager to another, you get a kind of a bleed over period where the old manager's ideas and influence sort of wanes as the new manager sort of stamps his authority. I think that's actually something I think we saw when we moved from Gerrard to Gio, was a little in part contributing to how well we did in Europe, because I still think there was some of that Gerrard fight and passion within the team, and I think that slowly kind of faded away over time, and we've not quite ever seen that same mentality since Gerrard's left. And a similar thing happened with McCoist. I think he was a sort of a traditional Scottish football type 4-4-2. He didn't really have many clever ideas when it came to sort of changing things tactically, and that was ultimately what you started to see more and more of him getting found out as he got higher up the leagues. It was fine in the first 2 years, or in the first two lower leagues, because just by sheer quality of player that we could afford, you were going to be better. But then as we got into the Championship and you were playing Hearts and Hibs and teams that were much closer to us in terms of technical ability and managers who were more tactically astute, I think you started to see them getting found out. And that happened in cup games as well. I mean, I'm sure Dundee United knocked us out of the cup about 5-6 times or something over the course of that period of time. We just kept coming up against them, and every time we would lose. Although, as I also noticed researching this, just given that the cup was the thing that he practiced on, his cup record is absolutely atrocious. He gets knocked out by, not just by Dundee United, but he gets knocked out by tiny teams. He gets knocked out in the first round, in quarters, and
did Falkirk knock us out as well at one point?
Yeah, Falkirk, if I remember correctly, Falkirk, Alloa, Forfar, Wraith Rovers beat us in a final. As I say, Dundee United knocked us out multiple times. He just, for some reason, just couldn't get anywhere in cups at all, despite having success in the leagues. And obviously the level of quality in part plays that. But I think, once that sort of influence of Walter waned, and then obviously he lost half the team, so or more than half the team. We didn't even have a full bench the very first match we played against Brecon after getting admitted back into the league system. And indeed, he only had 42 from the decision made to admit us back, to the point where the transfer embargo that we accepted took place. He only had 42 days to put together his squad, and I believe he only had like single digits worth at the start of that 42 days. So, I mean, he was hampered from all directions, really. But like I say, tactically, he just wasn't up to it in terms of as he went up the league and started to get more modern ideas. He just seemed to come unstuck more and more.
So we'll rip the bandage off a wee bit. We'll get off the first season and concentrate on the seasons down the leagues. So yeah, as you were just mentioning there, Doug, unprecedented. What happened to us, being put out the league, so you're getting back in, and then having transfer embargoes when you've lost all your decent players, well, most of your decent players. But Tom, I don't want to give my opinion just yet. But what was your hope for the team when we went down started in third division?
First of all, my first hope was that we'd actually have a team. We'd actually have a team to support when we went into administration. I didn't quite understand how sort of serious it was. I thought it was going to be a 10-point deduction. That'll be it. Next end of season will come. Next season will be spot on. And then as it obviously went on, you realise how much of a mess we were actually in. So my first thought was I just hope to have a team. But then after that, once we'd got through that sort of first game, I was really hoping that we'd build a team with the likes of your Lee McCulloch, your Lee Wallace, a couple of more experienced players, and then fill around them players from the academy and get them into the team and let them play. Because end of the day, Rangers Youth Academy player should be able to play in Scottish Third Division. I'm not saying they're going to tear it up and they're going to be the best players in the league, but at least give them. But it's a good opportunity to have, and then they can grow, play 40, 50, 60 games by the time we get up to the championship. And we've got near enough then seasoned professionals, people with experience. And I think that for me was my hope. And I'm still a little bit gutted that we sort of threw that chance away. I mean, even the likes of Barry Mackay, he went away on loan, I think, a couple of times. Didn't really sort of establish himself until really Mark Warburton came in. So that was 3 years of his development, really, that was lost, where he could have been playing 50, 60 games for Rangers and getting that experience. So I think that was my main hope, Billy, to be honest, that we'd build a team of experienced players who'd stayed and then complement them with younger players who could get the experience and then take the team on and, save money at the same time.
That's exactly what I was hoping you were going to say, Tom, because that was mine as well, that we would get, by the time we got back to the top league, we'd have all the best, young players. Anyway, I'll move on for that. I think I'm going to bring your slide back up again, Doug. Hopefully in your research, can you maybe tell us out of these players that were the ones that came to Rangers in the first season in the third division?
Can certainly double check it.
Try. Was Ian Black one that came when we first?
So I can tell off from what I remember, Billy. I think there was Templeton, Kevin Kyle, Sabrari. Was Mojny came in that season? Nicky Law, I think. Luku was when we were in the top league. But I'm sure I definitely remember Templeton coming that first season because he scored at Anfield, didn't he? I think did Hearts beat Liverpool, and then basically the following day he was a Rangers player.
Well, Doug,
I've got the list here.
Yes, no worries.
So Lee for the arrivals in 2011-12 were Lee Wallace, Doran Goyan, Carlos Bocanegra, Juanma Ortiz, Alejandro Bedoya, Matt Mackay, and Mervyn Selleck, as well as we promoted Chris Hegarty from the under-20. So Templeton came in the following year.
Yeah, I'm going to point out that comment about RFC 56 because that name should have meant he could never have came to us. But
I'm sure he wore green boots as well, if my memory serves me right.
But you're a world away from the team we had, especially under Walters last season, and even the season that Ali inherited that squad. So it's a real wake-up call for us if we didn't already know we were in for a battle. That's those types of signings. Despite Bocanegra was a great player. Lee Wallace obviously went on to have a good career for us, be the captain. It's just it's horrible reliving this, actually, isn't it?
So
yeah, thanks, Billy.
It's an interesting point to note as well that first year is the only year we really spent any money.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent just under $2 million to get Wallace, and the rest of them are all sort of $500,000 or less. And then after that, we paid for Templeton, but then it's free transfers. And the year after that, free transfers and loans. We had the year when we brought in all those guys from Newcastle as well. And it's not then until we finally get rid of Ashley that we actually started spending money again when we bought Kieran Tavernier and Jason Holt.
The thing that I don't want to have too much of a go on him at it, but it's been touched on earlier by you, Thommo. But the player development, for me, there really wasn't any player development with McCoist. Am I too harsh on him?
No, I think you're spot on, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier about just winning by any means, regardless of how it is, getting the 3 points and getting back up the leagues. I mean, when you look at him signing the likes of Kevin Kyle, at that point the guy was done, and we've heard Kevin Kyle on podcasts talking about how much he was paid each week to basically play in a part-time league, and it was just wasteful. I mean, I get the need that Rangers had to get promoted, and they had to, they couldn't be spending a long period of time down in the lower leagues. But even so, there's ways to go about it, and giving someone like Kevin Kyle, who, as I say, at that point was done, giving him thousands of pounds a week to play against, guys who are out working 9 to 5 and then coming to have a game against us. It's just, as I say, it was just massive mismanagement again.
The journey back, as we kind of affectionately called it, everything was going okay for his first couple of seasons up until he gets into the championship. And I don't know if it was yourself, Doug, that mentioned earlier on that's where he came up against the better teams where they were getting players of the similar standard to us. And was it Hearts that first season that won the championship? And then was that the year we were in a playoff with Hibs and then Motherwell? Was that a year later?
Yeah,
a year later.
That was the same year.
The same year, sorry. So I mean, if you're thinking about a Rangers team that can't beat that Motherwell team over 2 legs, that shows you how bad either as tactically wise or how bad the players wise back then. But when he came up against these teams that on paper you're thinking, oh, we should be beating, as I say, Motherwell. But I don't know if we played St Johnstone at that point as well. I do remember a couple of games against them, but that might have been under Warburton. It's just that's where he's shown up to be not, for me, able to cope with even your higher championship level managers. Is that fair, Doug?
Yes, although I would point out that he'd gone by the time we got to those.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're right. You're quite right, actually.
But the point remains though, because like I say, well, we opened that league season against Hearts and lost, and I think they had the better of us in almost every game that season. To be honest,
was that
they
first
were
game
just
at home?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Because to be quite honest, looking back on it, Hearts were just a better team than we were. And I mean, touching on the idea of us, had we built something by that, if we could have only had people who were invested in the club and actually cared about the club, then we might have had a plan that was long term and there to build and done all of those really good things. But I'm hesitant to put the blame on McCoist for any of that, because frankly I don't think anyone in charge of the club would have been interested in building from youth or growing anything. Had they, then we'd probably be in a better position when we come to get back into the Premiership. And to be honest, nor if I were McCoist would I probably want to do more than I felt was necessary to benefit the club, because the ultimate only benefactors are going to be the people who were taking money away. As I say, I think he wanted to be there to defend the club as a sort of to defend the soul of the club, if nothing else, and obviously to bring us back. There's a quote actually I thought was quite apt, and I feel like kind of sums up how I feel about the way he sort of chaperoned the club. So an interview he did in 2020, he said, "My hand on my heart, I never once thought about leaving, and that's why it's a very strange and emotional mixture, because it was without a doubt the most dramatic time in the club's history. It was a horrendous time. People who'd been at the place, and I'm not talking about players here, because generally speaking, players will survive, they can get another club and they can move on. But there was a core of people that the club had that every club has, particularly full-time professional clubs, that have been there for 10, 20, 25, 30 years, and it's their life. It's the people like that whose livelihoods were being taken from them, and that was absolutely crushing. In many ways, I often think about it, and people ask me, do I regret staying or do I regret taking the manager's job? And I think about it, and I always say the same. I don't regret it one bit, because the disappointment of what happened to the club and the bad luck that me as a coaching staff and players and group went through is outweighed by the fact that I'm proud that we managed to get through it. I look back and I'm glad in many ways that it was myself in charge, because without a doubt I made mistakes. 100% I made mistakes, but at least Rangers and the fans could have some comfort in the knowledge that it was a Rangers supporter and someone that knew how much the club meant to so many people. I think that to me really sums up why I was happy that McCoist was there, and what ultimately is as well as getting up through the leagues, was the most important aspect, that he was looking after that soul of the club, and that's why I think some of the stuff that comes at the end as well, I don't look too ill on him for either. But had the club built anything, I would have fully imagined they'd have probably done what we want to do now, built the young players up and then tried to sell them as soon as they could for a bit of cash, which would have then just gone to the folks in charge.
Yeah, it's extremely unfortunate, disappointing that it could have been an opportunity to build, young players coming through. But as you were saying there, we wouldn't have benefited from it long term. But I'm glad that it was someone like McCoist who was there in the middle of it. But you touched on challenges, so let's bring up your slide on the challenges that McCoist faced at his time through there. I'll need to maybe make my screen bigger so I can read one or two of them. Sorry. But Doug, do you want to? What was your, when you were collating this list, what was your kind of highlights?
I think the obvious highlights are probably the league aspects. Getting up the league, the main one, and that the sort of bottom middle or the middle column, the lower orange there is when he completes the invincible season in second division. So 33 wins, 3 draws, no losses. That was probably the highlight of McCoist's managerial career. They were, just good all throughout the season, and that was a really just comfortable year generally, in terms of on the pitch in the league. Originally I was going to try and make it a more condensed list so it was a bit more readable, but I kind of felt like I wanted to include it all, because it really shows the combination of how much was going on, be it on and off the pitch throughout that time. A lot of these things are, a good third of these are football related, but the rest is just all of the stuff that's going on behind the club, the various machinations and things happening. And in particular in that last year in 2014, I don't think it's any coincidence that, so you got in the final column, sort of the middle of the bottom section, 3rd of November 2014, or 2nd of October, you've got Mike Ashley becoming the major shareholder. And then in the start of November, he starts putting his cronies into the board. And then by the start of December, you've got just a month after McCoist putting his resignation in. I don't see that as a coincidence. I see that as McCoist having reached his limit. And there's rumours and talk about whether he was trying to do something in terms of forcing the board's hand. They were getting back into financial troubles because of the way Ashley had been operating in the background, trying to gain levers to get himself in charge, which he obviously ultimately did. And he did that by starving the club of money, because he could see that the actions the club were taking in terms of shares, trying to do runs for shares and things, weren't working. And he was the only one that would be willing to put money in to keep the business going into the new year. And so he's literally starving the club of money in the background so that he could position himself to take over, which, as I say, he does. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a month later then McCoist is resigning. As I say, some say that was a tactical thing on his part because he had that contract and the club would be forced to continue to pay him, and that maybe he was trying to do his own leverage in terms of finance. There's an aspect that he thought maybe he could just walk away from the aspects that were happening there while a battle for someone else came in. There was rumours of obviously other people going to try and challenge, which obviously ultimately eventually happened. Some think that maybe McCoist thought he'd get to come back to the club as manager, but no one will know that apart from himself. But there's just, I think it tells a story of someone that's, is getting the key things done. He gets the league wins for the first couple of years, but is still struggling because, as you see, like every third, fourth, or fifth thing is knocked out of cup in that list, because, as I say, his cup record is just atrocious. But then you've just got all the other stuff going on that really highlights that McCoist was in charge of the club at probably the hardest time any manager could have been, and a lot of people talk about how he looked when he started and how he looked when he finished, and he looks like he's aged 6 years and 3. So I've no doubt that the stress and everything else that was going on took a toll on him. And again, I'm just thankful that he was the one that was there to handle that.
Thommo, I don't know if you're able to see them, because I think you're on your phone, is that right? But if you can see them, for me in this list that you put together, and thanks a lot, Doug, it's not the depressing things for me aren't the losses or put out of cups. It's reading things like news breaks that Ashley got Ibrox rights for £1. Imran Ahmed has club assets frozen. Derek Lambias and Barry Leach appointed to the board. It's these are the things that were, it was just like it was like death by a thousand cuts for that whole time with them there. So, and anything I've not picked out or Doug's not picked out that you want to highlight, Thommo, if you can.
No, I think Doug's gone fairly comprehensive there, and it's a good breakdown of everything. And like I say, during that period of McCoist's time, even after the financial issues in 2012, it was a case of keeping this club to survive, because we were filled with leeches who were just wanting to take money. And I totally get what you guys have said about the youth systems. Any half decent player had come through there, they would have been sold on. Case in point, Lewis McLeod. First bid about £1 million, I think it was. Off he went, and unfortunately his career didn't really develop much due to injuries. But I totally agree that any assets that we had were in real danger of just being flogged off to the highest bidder. And I think something we don't acknowledge is every day McCoist going in there doing the job, what battles he must have been fighting every day, as well as getting a team together to get us back through the leagues and get us back to where we belong. It was the football at that point was taking second place, because, as I say, every day must have been a battle to just keep the club to survive, because we were being rinsed by con men and scumbags, basically, who, even to this day, I still can't understand how none of them have seen jail time. But that's a different conversation. But I think McCoy's done a sterling job to stick out for as long as he did. And even at the end, I still see fans now saying, "Oh, he took the money and went on garden leave." I'm happy the money went in his pocket and not one of those leeches who was at the club. I would rather it went in McCoy's pocket than one of them. So fair play to him. He deserved every penny, in my opinion.
Well, Doug, you've made it another slide for us, and this is his overall managerial record. So let's have a look at that one. I don't think that looks too bad. All in all, 72.5 win ratio.
Yep, I mean it's the highest win ratio of any manager apart from Clement, who's slightly above him at present. And I've forgotten his name now, but there's one other manager, but he only managed 2 games, so I don't think we count that.
No worries.
So it's the present company excluded. It's the highest of any manager. Now that's to be expected, of course. I mean, given the opposition that he was playing, but I mean, I think that suggests to me that on the whole, he did what he should have done, which was dominate. And on the whole, he did that. Again, it wasn't until he kind of got to the championship that things started to come unstuck. Sorry, and struggled a bit, but then, as I say, he left then in the December, so he only played 17 games in the championship, still won 11 of those, so it wasn't all doom and gloom. As I say, when you're talking about the actual managerial in terms of day-to-day work, he was a limited manager, and I don't think anyone would say any different, but on the whole, he did what he was employed to do, which was to get us up the leagues, and so that was fine. And again, the first half of the time he was in the championship was going okay. When it first started, and I think it's hard to say what would have happened had he not left, and if there weren't the other things going on. Again, as I say, you had Ashley coming in to take over the club by starving him of money, and that was all happening in the kind of run up to the January transfer window. So, had there not been those issues, maybe they've got some players in the January, maybe they'd have kicked on. It's one of those things we'll never know, but there are, you can, when you sort of look along the timeline of certain events, you can see certain knock-on effects, I feel, on the pitch. I mean, for example, just on the administration, when they went into administration, the next 4 games, they lost 3 out of 4 before they picked back up again. And I think that's kind of true of a lot of McCoist's tenure, that the team mentality seemed to be quite weak in terms of getting knocked. And when they took a knock, they would maybe suffer another one for fairly quick succession. And so they would tend to maybe lose a couple of games in little pockets before they pick back up again. And that was, again, maybe just part of him maybe not having what it takes to instill that little extra steel in a team. And when you think again of Coist's personality, I often wonder what he was like in the dressing room, what it would have been like to have him trying to be or did he even try? I don't know. To be a bit more disciplinarian or be a bit stronger with players, because you just know him as being such a nice, jovial, fun-loving guy, which I think suits the coaching position perfectly. When he can be more personable with the players, but maybe just didn't sit as being the number one.
Thommo, looking over those ratios, he did what was expected of him, I guess, from the lower leagues. But still 72.5 is a decent ratio for a win ratio for a manager, isn't it?
Yeah, you can, as I say, you can't knock it, but you've just got to put it into perspective. When they were in League 1 and 2, we were paying how much to our players, and as I say, playing against basically part timers. So I'd expect them to be winning the vast majority of the games. But as you rightly said, Billy, he'd done what was asked of him, get through the leagues, and unfortunately, the Championship was just one step too much for him, and everything else that was going on felt it was time to step down and let someone else have a go. But certainly getting up through League 2 and League 1, yeah, done it with pretty much a minimum of fuss. Both leagues were wrapped up fairly early, and yeah, I think when it comes down to the managerial, again, he got criticism after the reaction after we lost to Rafe in that cup final. There was obviously videos of him karaokeing and whatnot, and it's stuff like that unfortunately people remember. And is he a Rangers manager? Would Walter Smith have been doing that, for example? And a couple of other stories that came out. But in terms of the win ratio, I say you can't knock it, and yeah, fair play.
I guess we'll need to start winding things down, Doug. So we'll not go to your final thoughts, but just want to sum up what we've been talking about. And we were asking the question: was Ally McCoist a successful Rangers manager? Take it away.
Like I said, I think my summary is yes and no. He
Sitting on the fence there, mate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I was forced to pick an answer, I'd say yes, because I think he achieved the majority of what he was meant to do. So he got 2 out of 3 in terms of the leagues he needed to win before he left. And then, as I say, in terms of being a custodian of the club at that time, which is arguably more important than having gotten us up the leagues, because I genuinely believe that there could have been moments that that threatened the club's actual existence, and to put it in that context, that's more important than firing up the leagues as quick as possible. So overall, I would say yes, because I think he protected the club, he protected the ideals of the club, he protected the fact that it's a winning club that stood for something, and that we weren't going to let people take that away from us. We weren't going to let people rip us any further down than they'd already done. And as I say, I think he was the voice, one of maybe only 2 voices in the club. There was one person on the board that I forget the guy's name now, but there was one person on the board that I think tried to do his best for the club as well, until he was forced out by Ashley. So he was one of maybe 2 voices in terms of public that were actually advocating for the club. And there's just nothing more important, I think, than that aspect. And not a good manager technically, but did what was needed to get us up those first 2 years. Might have managed the third had he been able to stay. So, in terms of those four goals, he got 3 out of 4. So I'll give him a pass.
Oh, good. I think you're quite right, Doug, and I'll come to you, Tom. It's quite nuanced. The question, was he a successful Rangers manager because of everything that was happening, outside the club, with the SFA and things like that, and then also inside the club when it comes to the board and everything that was going on there with the well, I don't want to call them anything that can legally get me into trouble, but the people that were there who seemed to like to asset strip the club. So, but overall, what's your take on his time as manager?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes, he was successful in that he made sure that we had a club to support. To me, that overrides everything. But on the playing side of things, as Doug has rightly said, he won the 2 leagues that he was in charge for the whole season. I don't think we would have won the championship had he have stayed. Hearts were head and shoulders above us, and I think they were out of sight even when Ally left in that December. So I don't think he would have won that league. But he done what was asked of him. He got us through the leagues. But more importantly, he got the fans on side. Galvanised the fans. He was a figurehead for us and someone that we know truly loved the club. And Doug mentioned someone else who was on the board, and someone else who doesn't really get a mention, but went through a lot of ridicule at the time, was John Brown. He again put his head above the parapet, got absolutely ridiculed by other fans, by the media, and he was right. He was right, and we needed more people like that to do that sort of thing at the time, and sadly we didn't have them. But McCoist, I would say yes, he was successful. Style of play might not have been great, but again, you're playing against part-time players, and that has to drag the players down as well. But he done what he had to do and helped us start on the journey back where we were supposed to be.
Thommo, well, I'm going to wrap things up, but I'll say thank you very much, and I'll let you have a final say yourself. But answer me this hypothetical. Say McCoist did win the championship and when it took us up to the Premier League, would we have won 55 any earlier?
No, I don't think so. Not just because of the manager. I just think of still all the circumstances and the money that Celtic had, and when we went up, they signed Brendan Rodgers and were signing all the likes of Dembele, Sinclair. So I don't think it would matter who was in charge. It was just circumstances, and we didn't have the players.
We'll go and say your goodbyes then.
Okay. As always, Billy, thank you for having me on. Again, another great discussion and some great comments coming through as well. So lot more great pods coming up. So please like and subscribe and tell all your friends about us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thommo. And Doug, yourself, please answer that question as well, if you wouldn't mind, before you say goodbye.
What question?
Would we have 155 if he'd stayed taking us up any earlier?
Yeah, totally. He'd have been galvanised by being back in the Premiership. He'd have become player manager at that
That's
point.
it.
And thanks everyone for tuning in again. It's a really good discussion, loads to talk about from that time. And as I say, once again, thankful that Ally was there when we needed him most.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for the comments that come in. I do read them all. Can't always get all of them on the screen, but thank you very much for your comments. And I'll reiterate what Thommo said. If you like what you're seeing, please tell your friends about us. Please subscribe. And remember, every night is a Rangers Journal night. Good night.